Hey, one more thing before you go. It's been 23 years since the tragic events of September 11th, 2001, yet the ripples of that day are still profoundly felt. In this episode, we have a conversation with Matt Warshauer, author of Creating and Failing the 9/11 Generation, who sheds light on how the aftermath of 9/11 has deeply affected America's youth and how it has influenced American foreign policy, leading to some of today's most challenging international issues. Stay tuned as we explore the lasting legacy of 9/11 on our society. I'm your host, Michael Herst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. My guest in this episode is Matt Warshauer. He's a professor of history at Central Connecticut State University. His undergraduate alma mater, where he learned that passionate, devoted professors can change lives. According to Matt, the alienation and fear of experienced by young people today can be traced back to the fall of the Twin Towers and the ensuing chaos. We discuss how the 9/11 generation, closely tied to millennials, was already prepositioned to distrust the government and feel a lack of control over their lives. The events of that day only intensified these sentiments. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
What, an amazing journey that you have. I mean, we're going to delve into it in a minute or two here, but congratulations on what you've achieved so far in educating, inspiring, and motivating people from your perspective, your point of view, and as a professor. So thank you for giving back to the world with that.
Thank you. It's very much a journey with my students. Anybody who reads the book is gonna, I hope, feel like they're in class with us.
That's it.
You'll hear the voices of my students, and I've learned, I feel like I learn as much from them as they learn from me.
That's an amazing. I love those kind of professors. You sometimes you get lucky, and get somebody like you. Sometimes you you get the other end of the stick where it's kind of like, this is what you're going to do this, get your homework, go home, see you tomorrow. And there's no compassion and empathy and let me take you on this journey that you are
That, you
going
know
to.
what? That's exactly what it's about. It's about the journey. It's about, so many people, especially historians, they've gotten teachers have gotten to this idea that, well, history is about the facts. Here's what happened. It's
Yeah,
about the story. It's about the facts matter, but it's about the
yeah.
story and the narrative. And when I run into students who had me a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and they run up to me and give me a big hug, which just happened this weekend at our football opener, and they introduce me to their friends and go, "This is the best professor I ever had." That's, you
Yeah.
can't ask for more than that,
Can't ask
right?
for more than that. Exactly. You can't ask more than that. That means you reached one, but I know that you've reached many, and that's our goal in life, is to touch one person, to move that forward and let them pay it forward with that inspiration, that motivation, and that education to
I
allow
get
them.
emails from students who took this particular course. I'll get emails from them years out from the course. I got one from a young woman who started working for American Airlines at Logan Airport in Boston, where
Oh,
two of the planes came from. And she emailed me. I hadn't talked to her in 3 years. She emailed me and said, "Oh, professor, I just started training, and they have a memorial to 9/11 at the airport, and they do an entire presentation on 9/11." And so I started bringing up all these points. And she goes, and the trainer came up to me afterwards and said, "How do you know so much about this?" And this young woman said, "Oh, I took an entire semester long course on 9/11." And she said, one, she felt so good. She knew so much. But then she had an instant rapport
yeah.
with the people at
The
American
people
Airlines
there,
because she could feel what they had felt. It was really that those are the kinds of neat things that come back around on this subject.
which is fantastic. I mean, especially if, like, I remember, like, I was, when that took place. And we'll get into it. But when this took place, I had just recently retired from the police department. Number one, so I was home. But when it took place, I felt helpless because I thought I need to go back to work and do something about this. And like I say, we'll kind of get into that. But it left me with a profound. I mean, I watched it on the news. I was watching the news. I was watching Regis and Kelly, not Kelly, Regis and who was the first one? Oh
Was
my
it
God.
Kathy Lee?
Kathy Lee, thank you very much. It was Regis and Kathy Lee, and it was behind them. They were
Yeah.
facing that way, and I watched it behind them, and everybody gasped, and Regis turned around and looked. It was like, wow. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of blew up from there. But anyway, we'll get into that. I,
Well,
I
so this is actually the perfect segue, right? Because you say everybody gasped. And that's exactly what happened. I refer to this as the collective gasp of 9/11. Everybody involuntarily went, oh,
yeah,
and I'm not sure America has ever fully exhaled. We sort of bated breath,
yeah,
waiting for the next thing to happen. And then, imagine you, a grown man, an adult, a police officer who is in such a position of authority to do things about things, and you felt helpless.
yeah.
Now imagine all of the kids who are watching the most important people in their life, teachers and parents, fall to pieces, and they see nothing but fear. And how does that impact them? That's a lot of what this book is about.
It is. I give kudos for creating and writing this book. I think because it is a conversation that I don't think we ever let go, and I don't think we should let it go because
Yeah.
I think it needs to stay at the forefront of our lives for several reasons. Number one is to make sure that it never happens again, and number two to have the understanding that even we, as the greatest nation in the world, were vulnerable, to what was happening, and that we, as the greatest country in the world, felt completely helpless at some point. I mean, it was a day without repeating December 6th. It was a day left, in infamy because it was
Yeah.
something that was indelibly built into my brain. I did not know anybody that was perished during that time period, but I do have officers that I work with that were police officers in New York City and in Manhattan, in that whole arena area, that had left there, came to work for our department in Colorado, and they were at a loss completely because they lost friends, they lost colleagues, the fire departments, police departments are intertwined, and the port authority out there, the ones that lost the majority of the individuals. One of the guys on my team in particular was a sergeant with the port authority, and he took a week off
Yeah.
because he just didn't know how to do that. Anyway, I got a couple questions about you, if I don't mind,
Yeah.
before we really
Please.
jump into this. I like to know kind of a little bit about you in my audience, my community. Could you let me try that in English. See, I'm getting so excited about this conversation. I'm getting tongue tied. Where'd you grow up?
My wife would dispute the idea that I ever grew up, to be honest. I grew up all over the place. Born in Houston, Texas, then lived in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, California, Connecticut. I moved around a lot, not because I was an army brat, but because just strange family stuff and divorces and things like that. But I came to live in Connecticut. I went to three different high schools in 4 years, and the third high school I was at was here in Connecticut, in Westport, Connecticut. And it's very, very funny because about a year ago or two, I work with a lot of social studies teachers, and one teaching coordinator, curriculum coordinator, invited me to come do a professional development with some her teachers, and I said, "Oh, what high school are you in?" And she says, "Oh, Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut." And I started laughing and said, "Oh, well, that's where I graduated from." She said, "Oh, it'll be so good to have you back." And when I went and they introduced me, and the first thing I said to all the people there, all the teachers, including the vice principal and the principal, I said, "Yeah, when I graduated from here, no one, and I mean no one, was planning on inviting me back." So, it's funny how things turn around. I was sort of a troublesome kid and came to Central Connecticut State University as an undergraduate and met a couple of professors who quite literally changed my life. And I would not be doing what I'm doing today. And I really feel like some people um, devoted themselves to me, and I have the opportunity to do it for others, for my students. I love kids. I love college kids. I love working with them and opening up their minds and getting them to explore ideas. I think it's lacking in our society today, so it's something that I'm really committed to.
which is outstanding. I think that's an opportunity for people to understand that we should be lifelong learners. In my opinion, I think that we should always strive to learn everything that we can about what exists in the world around us and how we take a part in it. So, well done. Thank you very much for doing
Without
that.
question.
What got you interested in teaching? Why did you, was it these teachers, these professors that you had been with? What got you into history? And
He got me into history, right? So I was interested in undergraduate. I was interested in history and literature, both American subjects, and so I was actually studying American studies, which is very interdisciplinary and pulls those two things together. And by the time I was pretty close to graduating my senior year, I was a very late bloomer. I always have been, and I just thought, I haven't learned everything I feel like I need to learn. I've been so fascinated by America's history and the challenges that have faced this nation, and so I said to both of these professors, do you think I could hack it in grad school? And they both supported me, and I applied to grad school, planning on taking a year off. My plan was not to become a professor. My plan was just to learn. And so I took a year off. I crewed on sailboats in the Caribbean for a number of months. I was also lifelong. I've been involved in martial arts for years and years and years. And I went on a team to Poland and Russia in 1990. And when I was finishing grad school, I thought, maybe I'll give this academia thing a shot. Never thinking I would find a position. I thought I was going to end up teaching martial arts and self defense and flipping houses for a living. And one of my former professors, who had become a mentor, called me and said, "Hey, we have a position that just opened up. You should take it." And it was just a 1 year emergency appointment, and I ended up getting the tenure track. And I've sort of never looked back. I even came into the department thinking that I wasn't going to be nearly as good as all of these other professors who are coming in, many of them from Ivy League schools. I did my doctoral work at St. Louis University, which is a fantastic Jesuit institution, but it's not Ivy League. And, I thought, man, I have a lot to prove to myself and to those other people. And I've worked really, really hard, and I think I've been really successful on a number of fronts, and I feel really good about that.
well, from our conversation previous to the start of this interview, I absolutely would think that you affected people in a very positive way, which, that's what we should all do in life. Touch somebody's soul and motivate them and inspire them and move them forward and
My
let
thing with
them.
my students is I'm always telling them, you know what? Give more than you take. Give back more than you take. It's not, American individualism and self-interest can often be a very sharp edge. And we have a lot of blessings in this country, and we need to do as much as we give as much as we take.
I agree with that 100%. It's interesting because you and I have a couple things in common. Number one, martial arts, because I did martial arts for years and years and years, especially working with the police department, and I got waylaid with that, but it helped me to walk again. Actually, the disciplines that I had practiced helped me to focus and to overcome some of the things that I need to overcome to walk again. But sometimes life puts us in a position like we did
Yeah,
with you. You never expected to become a professor, that it was
yeah.
just a kind of a temporary thing. And sometimes life puts us on a path that we weren't sure was right for us, or we didn't think was our path. And it turns out brilliantly.
I think that's very true. Martial arts, I feel like it saved my life when I was a troubled kid and not sure where to go and what to do. And the discipline, as you said, the discipline really focused me. And I've got some of my best friends from my whole life are as a result of martial arts. And it's funny, as you say, how life turns out. And when I got married, most of the guys in the wedding party were all guys who I banged around with and trained with. And it's very funny, when I came back to Connecticut, never thinking I was going to move back here, and my wife and I started having children, I created a dojo in my attic and started training my kids and their friends. I would go
Very cool.
to the elementary school and the middle school and pick them up 2 days a week, and it was just part of our routine. And I contacted one of my instructors at one point, and I said, Master Peoples, I said, there was a point, I was training with some of the best people in the nation. I was with you. I went on a national team to Germany. We fought some of the biggest tournaments in the world, and now I'm in an attic with a bunch of 6 and 7 year olds. I said, this fate of life is very weird. And he's like, he's a very, very funny guy. He goes, it's all right. It's all right. We're all good. It's time for you to give back. That's all this is about. So it was
Exactly.
very cool.
Where,
It was very cool.
what,
And all my girls are tough as nails. So
exactly,
it's great.
exactly. It's like, yeah. I didn't, I wasn't at your level with teaching others, but I did teach my girls martial arts as well. In fact, I got them in trouble a couple of times because boys were getting a little too handsy and things worked. And then we got a phone call and it's like, well, you know, don't do that.
Same situation. One of my
Exactly.
oldest daughter's best friends, Jane, she showed up in class in third grade, I think it was, with the cutest little outfits and mini skirts, and I thought this kid's never gonna make it. She's one of the only kids that made it all the way to her black belt, and that girl was so tough. And in high school, some boy walked over and thought he was gonna be cute, and she looked at him and said, "Do not touch me. Don't touch me." And he did. And he ended up face down with his arm behind his back. And she whispered in his ear, "I told you, don't ever touch me." I was so proud.
Life lessons, instant
Yeah,
life lessons. Yeah, it works.
yeah.
What got you interested in 9/11 and in the
Well,
project that you were doing?
yeah. So it's actually I've always taught and studied American history and American political history, but 9/11 is actually very far outside the field. Um, my original work in grad school and my original work here at the university was always in early American history, political and constitutional history. So, Declaration of Independence to the Civil War. And in 2011, I was the co chair of the Connecticut Civil War Commemoration Commission for the 150th anniversary. And I was at a library and I was talking to an audience of about 100 people or so about memory and meaning in the Civil War in Connecticut. And it was, of course, was to a group of people who had no memory of this event and very little understanding of the meaning of the event. And so I'm trying to explain it to them, and I'm looking out these huge glass windows of the library, and across the street was a large, large banner that said, 9/11, 10th anniversary, we will never forget. And all I could think standing there was, you want to bet? We'll forget. It's inevitable. Time moves on, generations move on. So this is an important subject. And I committed to myself right then and there that I was going to study this in a serious way. And I had to wait until that Civil War commemoration was over in 2015. But as soon as it was done, I began creating this 100 level entry course called 9/11 Generation. And I've been teaching it for about 10 years now, and I have students from freshmen to seniors, every conceivable major at the university, and I just love teaching this group. And over the course of this 10 years, I started with at the first day asking, beginning the class, what do you remember? A number of years ago, I had to change it to, what do you know? Because the kids didn't remember anything. And recently, I changed it to, does 9/11 even matter anymore? And the first time I asked that question, I had a young man who looked at me and he was just incredulous. And he said, "What? What do you mean? Of course it matters." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Absolutely, it matters. I believe it matters. Why?" And he had no answer to that question. By the end of the semester, I ended the last day of class. I looked specifically at him and said, "Does my 9/11 even matter anymore?" And he said, "Yes, it does." And he went down a list of reasons why. Uh, and so that is very, very important to me. I think we're at a place in the United States right now where teachers are only beginning to embrace 9/11 into their curriculum. But the problem is there's not enough out there in terms of material to really look at 9/11 in a whole way. And the subtitle of this book is The Real Story of September 11th. There's not enough information about the real story. And that's something we could talk further about what that means.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I think, in itself, when you talk about kids these days in history, I think that the curriculum overall, whether it be history, geography, social studies, political integration into any class, whether it be middle school, high school, or even college, I think is failing to a particular point. I don't believe that they are educating our youth enough in regard to that. I think that my kids were young when that took place. They were both, let me see, yeah, they were both in elementary school. Um, they're a couple years apart, but both of them were in elementary school at that time. And I was getting ready to take them to school actually when this took place, and I kept them home because of it. So they kind of know what was going on. They grew up with it. They grew up with the fact that I'm part of the Blue family. I still to this day am part of police organizations across the country, across the world, actually, in regard to that. So I placed a close connection to what was going on, what happening, in the loss of life, not only from a civilian perspective, but also from a police perspective and a firefighter perspective. I work with firefighters, EMTs and firefighters and paramedics, and at least in Colorado, we were one big family. We had our rivalries. You had the games. You had
Yeah.
and they cooked better than we did. But it's kind of one of these things that. So my kids grew up with it and they understood it. So every time they did a memorial or did something on TV where they recognized it, it was important and they paid attention to it. But from what I just understood from you, it seems to be going by the wayside. That it's not being taught, it's not being integrated into the system anymore, so that people have an understanding of that part of our history. What do you feel? What would you suggest, or what do you feel needs to be addressed to bring that back?
Well, it is being lost. Those of us who remember where we were on 9/11 are never going to forget where we were. I was with a group of students. But even recently in the last 5 years, schools around here in Connecticut, and Connecticut is very tied to New York. Schools in Connecticut have been getting rid of their moments of silence each year on September 11th because the kids have no idea what it means. And I've talked to a lot of students over the last many years who say, as a result of my class, yeah, I never understood those moments of silence. Yeah, of course I knew something bad happened. I knew it was about New York City. I knew it was about planes, but nobody ever took the time to teach me about this subject. So, that's a part of it. But then you also look at the museums that have. I just did an interview last week about the New York State Museum in Albany, and they created a museum almost immediately after 9/11 by bringing all kinds of parts of debris from the buildings and the planes. And if you've ever been to the September 11th Memorial Museum in New York City, which I take students to every single semester,
Yeah.
yeah, I've been there a dozen times. And those are they're very, very important places. And what their primary goal in those kinds of museums is to tell what I refer to as the tragedy and triumph narrative of 9/11. That's the 102 minutes of the story. And it's when the first plane was struck the north face of the North Tower to the time when that tower fell. And the tower one was hit first, but it fell last. And so the 102 minutes is the amount of time that elapsed before that strike and the collapse. And almost our entire narrative, 9/11, is about that. All of the oral history projects that deal with the lives of people who are lost, the lives of the survivors, the first responders and cleanup workers. Everything revolves around that story, and that is incredibly, incredibly important to know those stories. There's a lot of books out on that, and they're all very, very inspiring. And it's the tragedy and triumph because this terrible tragedy befell us. Yet, the United States is a remarkably resilient country, and we're good at coming back from things, and hence the triumph. But that's not really the story of 9/11. It's a piece of the story of 9/11. And I think, now being 23 years out, we need to learn more than just that. We need to understand why 9/11 happened. And that has not ever been really adequately explained to people. So I have a chapter in this book, chapter 3, that's specifically titled, it's just simply titled, Why? And we need to understand what the United States does in the aftermath of 9/11 and how that impacts our own country and how that impacts the rest of the world, which is really quite profound. We live in a post 9/11 world in which grievances and anger have been very, very much aggravated by the U.S. response. There's a lot of things we could have done in response to this, and I think we made a lot of bad mistakes. I think most people, or many people, I should say, recognize this, but we haven't fully explored it, and we're never going to fully come to grips with the story of 9/11 until we do that.
Do you think that the mistrust that that generation that grew up with this and knowing what happened and took place, as well as the current generation that may have some inkling of it, that is a basis for mistrust of the government and how it operates, and maybe that they're hiding something
Uh,
without
I,
being
I don't
conspiracy?
know. Yeah, I don't think it's the conspiracy thing. I don't even think it's that they mistrust government because of the failures of policy after 9/11. First, you would have to conclude that the students are getting that history and understanding all of that, and they know what foreign policy is. And I don't think the majority of students, or for that matter, the majority of Americans, even understand those things. So I take great pains to explain all of that in the book. I think it is not that. I think it is more a sense of this overwhelming chaos that has followed 9/11 in American society. And it doesn't just have to do with 9/11. It has to do with the economic collapse after 9/11. It has to do with the government, of the partisanship that exists in our government. It has to do with the government's failure to be able to deal with things that's important to these kids, such as the economy, such as climate change, such as um, school and public shootings, right?
Yeah,
The government has failed to deal with any of these things, and these kids know it.
I agree with that 100%. I think that we have, it's a constant chaos every day that you wake up. You don't know what you're going to turn the channel to. When you turn on the news, what's going to show up, you just anticipate that it's going to be bad news. I mean, it's, I talk to people all the time in regard to this. They're going, I'm tired of the news. I'm tired of the fighting. I'm tired of there's such a political device in today's society that they can't work together anymore. And you can actually see that they can't work together anymore. It is either one way or it's the other way. Nobody knows how to come to the middle. And that additionally creates the chaos that the government's not functioning like it should be and taking care of us as the individuals that belong here and live here and thrive here and raise families here and so forth. And I think that I think that it has created such a, it's a mess. It's just a mess.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'd like to key in on one thing that you just said there. It's either this way or that way, right? The way that you phrased it. And George W. Bush, as president, uh, continually pounded home that you're either with us or against us.
yeah,
And he talked about 9/11, and he influenced the generation in huge ways by constantly talking about good versus evil and judging things purely in that perspective, putting forth the message that they attacked us because they hate our freedom, which was just a vast oversimplification of this issue. And he really went around to a lot of schools and gave these kinds of talks, and it's no wonder that these kids today see things in a good versus evil perspective. And all of this sort of attitude has polarized our politics even further. And I don't want to make the mistake of arguing some of these problems and partisanship wouldn't have occurred anyway. It
right.
would have. But it's just
Absolutely.
been so severely exacerbated by the response to 9/11, to the extent now that we one of the goals in war is to dehumanize your enemy.
Yeah.
So it makes it easier to go after them. That's what our politicians have done to us Americans.
Every day.
They do it every day, and they dehumanize what is often, legitimate differences of opinion. And our nation was founded on the idea of compromise. And democracy is messy. It was meant to be messy. It was meant to be slow. But to literally delegitimize the opposition's point of view goes way, way too far. And I really believe a lot of that language stems from the post 9/11 era.
Seed was planted, now it's grown and branching out and moving farther and much more in depth than it was before it started, which is unfortunate, extremely unfortunate. I mean, earlier you had made a comment in regard to. I know that you have a chapter in your book about it, but can we talk a little bit about the whys? Maybe give us a little insight as to why 9/11. Because
Sure,
I personally
sure.
myself, I think that obviously we all have our own opinions of what we see, what we watched. Those of us that watched it happen, it made me angry, it made me upset, it made me helpless, like I told you, because I felt that I needed to try to go back to work, and I couldn't go back to work because I was injured to such a point, which then created more resentment and anger at the whole situation in the first place. And listening to my colleagues, my guys that were on the street, because it was when that happened. I mean, they shut everything down, of course, and then the cops were constant patrol. I mean, just constant patrol, constant aware. Luckily, I have colleagues that checked on us all the time. See, police car driving in front of the house all the time. Kids were asking, "Why is a cop car driving in front of the house, Daddy? Why is a cop car driving in front of the house? Why are they here?"
Mm,
Kind of a thing. Not that they were afraid of cops, because obviously they grew up with cops. Their godfathers were cops,
yeah.
kind of a thing. But it was like, why are they doing this so much? Um, so can we maybe delve a little into that? I would really appreciate it.
Sure. Well, just that awareness from your kids, that there's something wrong, there's something off. I think this is a great example of this sort of minor but constant presence of the security state in the aftermath of 9/11 that influences the generation in such huge ways. Kids, they learn and they absorb the stress that their parents and the other adults around them. So that this is one of the core impacts of the 9/11 generation. But in terms of this question of why, it's so tremendously important. The narrative from the government was that it's good versus evil, that they hate freedom, and that's the way they attack the United States. And George Bush even addresses this in his State of the Union address after 9/11. He says, many Americans are at home, questioning why do they hate us so much? And that was his answer, that it's just good versus evil. It's that they hate freedom, and that's not the real answer. I mean, we could certainly conclude that the attack on civilian buildings is an act of evil, that it's a horrible, horrible thing. Um, Bush, in a different address, he's in front of West Point at a commencement address, and he says, "Nothing we did stoked the ire of killers. It's not like they gave us a list or anything." Well, that's actually not true. They gave us a long list. Osama bin Laden uh, delivered in 1996 his declaration of jihad, which is about 20 pages, single spaced, in which he outlines exactly what his and many other Muslims' grievances are with the United States. Part of it stems from exactly what we're seeing in the Middle East right now between Israel and the Palestinians, and the problems that exist there. That's part of it. But part of it is also that, in the first Gulf War, in 1990-91, the United States sent a lot of troops to push Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And then we kept troops in Saudi Arabia. And bin Laden and many other Muslims had a big, big problem with that. And bin Laden repeatedly says in the Declaration of Jihad that, there are infidel forces in the land of the two holy places, Mecca and Medina. And he goes to great pains to try and explain, look, we've tried everything we can in through peaceful means. He goes, but you continue to bomb Muslim people. and you continue to attack us. And he puts forward the question, do you believe that Muslim blood is the cheapest in the world, and that the people you're killing on a regular basis don't have uncles and brothers and fathers and sons, and that we're not going to at some point retaliate for this? And, he says, I guess if you're going to call me a terrorist, I'll have to accept being a terrorist. But so are you a terrorist for using drone warfare and bombing us incessantly. Um, and, this is getting into foreign policy, and we don't want to get to a position where, the difficulty I have with students a lot of times, I have them read bin Laden. And I think the vast majority of Americans have never read anything from bin Laden. And the initial response to that is, oh, that would be unpatriotic. But one of the things we need to understand is, if bin Laden is our enemy, and I think it becomes that at some point, uh, we have to understand what his ideology and his thinking is if we're going to stop that ideology from spreading. That's incredibly important. I mean, Sun Tzu in The Art of War said, know your enemy. And many security experts and international policy experts have said repeatedly since 9/11 that we cannot defeat this ideology with bombs and bullets alone, that we have to understand why they have a problem with the United States. And the American government has never wanted to really effectively address that issue. And so we're not going to be able to resolve these problems. And ultimately, we haven't resolved them. We fail in Iraq, we fail in Afghanistan, we have to withdraw from Afghanistan in a way that is not just reminiscent, but mirrors our failure and our withdrawal from Vietnam. So Americans need to be much more aware of what's happening overseas in our name. And I think a lot of people around the world, the last chapter of the book is called 9/11 in the World, where I look very, very carefully at how other nations view 9/11. And they express tremendous anguish and support for the US. Even places like China and Russia and Iran put out a reaching hand, a helping hand to us after 9/11. And it's not until Bush makes this famous speech, the Axis of Evil speech, in his State of the Union address in 2002, in which he basically says, you're either with us or against us. We're going to do anything we feel like doing in response to this. That's when world opinion turns against us. And I think it's a legitimate question for Americans and for others around the world to ask, is America, this nation that has done so much for the world from World War II on, do we continue to be a force for good in the world as a result of our policy? I think most Americans genuinely believe that we want to be a force for good, but I'm not sure that's always our government policy. That's one of the things we have to get into, and that the book explores a lot.
Kind of go into in depth with that. Something you mentioned earlier, and along the same lines of what you had just spoken about, was patriotism. The patriotism, and when you mention patriotism, you think about. Obviously, I was not alive in World War II, but I helped an individual write his memoir. That an amazing memoir, actually, from his experiences in World War II. He joined the military at 16 years old because of his patriotism. And, he lied about his age, and he was already aboard a ship before they found out. And they were in the middle of bombing Iwo Jima. So what are they going to do with him, right? So they said, okay, well, you get to spend your 17th birthday here, and here you go. And it was an amazing journey. But he said that his patriotism, he was a patriot for the United States. He felt slighted. And he said, this is what I felt that I had to do along with a lot of my friends and a lot of other individuals. Because I said, what made you want to go to war at 16 years old? He said, because I wanted to defend my country and I was a patriot. How do you think that's changed? How do you think 9/11 changed that? Do you think it did for the better or for the worse? Do you think it exasperated something?
I think it's without question changed it for the worse. It's so interesting that you bring up this point, Mike, because last week I asked a group of students, and I've asked this question many times based on many, many articles that I've read, the fact that the United States has failed to reach its recruiting goals for all branches of the military for a long time now. And I've asked students many times, if a war occurred, how many of you would be willing to voluntarily join the military in defense of this nation. And the numbers are very, very small. And in the aftermath of 9/11, a lot of people think that a wave of patriotism hit the United States, and it absolutely did. There's no question about that.
Right.
But it didn't fill out recruiting offices. There was a tiny, tiny bump, not the way Pearl Harbor did. There was a
Right.
tiny bump in recruitment after 9/11, and then recruitment goals went down and down and down. And that's why so many soldiers were deployed and redeployed and redeployed. And I don't know if you're at all familiar with an author named Phil Clay. It was a Marine Corps captain, and has turned into a really, really tremendously good writer. And he wrote a book called Redeployment, about how many members of the military felt about this issue of patriotism in the aftermath of the wars. And one of the things we learn is it's from Vietnam to the war on terror. We learn that soldiers aren't directly responsible for policy, but
Right.
they're doing their jobs, and that's a very, very important understanding for us to have. So a lot of people started saying, thank you for your service, thank you for your service. And at first, it's an honor. After a while, these soldiers look at it and they think to themselves, what the hell do you know about service? They come
Yeah.
home. And a common statement that was made that Phil Clay brings up in a New York Times essay he wrote was, it became a common statement in the military. We went to war while you went to the mall. So they
Yeah.
would come home after deployment, and it didn't even look like the United States was at war. It's just, less than 1% of our military, of our population serves in the military, and we're relying on just this group of men and women to go out there and defend us, and the rest of the country is just going along like nothing's happening. And what impact does that have on our military?
Well, I do know that I've had a number of conversations with individuals that were deployed and redeployed and redeployed and redeployed. It burned them out, and they've got
Sure.
PTSD, and they've got so many other issues in regard to the whole situation, that when they first joined the military, it was for more of a patriotic reason. It was more for serving my country. It was more because this is what I really want to do this. And by the time they got out, they were so burnt out that they went, I don't want
Yeah.
anything to do with it anymore, completely
I agree with that completely. And
kind of situation.
I think one of the most remarkable experiences I've had with a service member, and I had plenty of students who went off to war, and fortunately, all of them came back alive, though some physically injured, some with really severe
Right.
PTSD. But I had a young man a number of years ago who was a non traditional student. He was probably in his late 20s, early 30s. And I noticed that he walked with a limp and had a cane. He never really said much in class. But for the midterm exam for my 9/11 generation course, I would always ask the students, please write me an essay in which you discuss the three things that you think are most important in this class so far. And I get really unique essays with an open-ended question like that. And I don't have to read the same essay over and over and over and
Yeah.
over again. So it's a boon to me as well. But this guy started off his essay and he said, coming into this course, I thought I knew everything I needed to know about 9/11. It's the reason that I joined the United States Marine Corps fresh out of high school when I was 18. It's the reason that I did 3 tours of duty in Iraq. It's the reason that I had friends killed and wounded. It's the reason that I watched friends lose limbs. It's the reason that I was blown up by an IED and I'll walk with a limp for the rest of my life. But I now realize from studying just half a semester's worth of material that I had gone into the war angry, and my only goal was vengeance. And now I realize that there were so many other options,
Yeah.
and so many of my friends might be alive today. That's my goal. That's my goal in this book. I hope that this is a book of healing. I hope the end of the book ultimately is has a positive flair to it of what we need to expect from this generation, which is a lot.
All right. Well, realistically, I mean, a profound story. I mean, I hope that this individual is, coping very well to this day, because again, I've had numerous. I I um, I almost went to Vietnam myself. I had friends of mine, classmates of mine, that went to Vietnam, that were deployed in Vietnam, and then the stopped that right before I had to go, which I'm grateful for, but I still ended up joining the military anyway. I was not deployed to any war zones or anything like this, like, from that perspective. I fought a different war when I got, when I did my thing. I get into law enforcement, and it's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
But, it, at the time that in my time, in watching my friends and my family go to Vietnam. I had a couple uncles that went to Vietnam. Both of them came back with PTSD. One of them came back with a bullet wound because he just got, he was a medic, but he got tired of the constant everything coming in and coming in, all the guys coming in, and limbs gone and this gone, that gone, that he felt he was going to go out and do something about himself. And he made the mistake of grabbing a weapon and walking right across the other line, and he got shot, and then he was in the infirmary going through
Yeah.
everything with. But it it was at that time. It wasn't more to me. It wasn't a. I want to do my duty. This is my patriotic duty. This is this. I'm okay with going to war. At the time that I watched my friends go to war and die, I watched family members go to war. Close friends of my parents that went and died. It was, and then when they come back, of course, it was a whole different conversation. They were spit on. They were, you're trash. You're this. You're that, and so forth. I think that the patriotism had taken a nosedive from Pearl Harbor through Vietnam. 9/11, I think, kind of reignited some form of
Yeah.
patriotism, because it allowed us to say, well, wait a minute, we're, you stepped on our toes, kind of a thing. But now I have a deeper understanding of what you have intertwined with that, with some of the reasons why it went a little more in depth than, and how it affects us today. So I think that even this brief conversation that we've had is opened my eyes a little more to how some of this evolved from 9/11 till now, and the political discourse that we see now, as well as even in general, people in general. You see, there's such a divisive nation these days. I'll tell you something when we stop. We don't need to put it into this, but it is such a divisive nation. I think now that it's either back to the you're with me or you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all see it. And my hope is, what's very interesting is, Vietnam is the perfect example. There was an attempt. One of the goals was, by Bush and a lot of the people around him, was to erase the failure of Vietnam by being supremely successful in Iraq, and that didn't occur. And when I started as a young professor here at the university, many of the older professors who were getting ready to retire, when they had first started their careers, it was during the Vietnam era, and university campuses were the center focal points of opposition to that war, and of really pushing democracy to its very limits. When we invaded Iraq in 2003, that was not happening. College campuses, students weren't engaged at all. And I think for a good portion of the 9/11 generation, which, I haven't really defined it here for us yet, but Gen Z to me is the 9/11 generation. They're not Gen Z, they're the 9/11 generation. And they are they're quiet. They don't do anything. The back half of the millennials are quiet. The front half of the Gen Z or 9/11 generation are quiet. They don't say anything. This event is so enormous, it's like hitting them in the head with a mallet, and they don't do anything. But in recent years, the back half of the 9/11 generation, about 5 years ago, they suddenly got to the point in the wake of all of this chaos that had been dragging the generation along, tumbling along the bottom, never getting a chance to surface. Um, they suddenly wake up one day and go, you know what? The adults aren't in charge. They're not going to do anything. And you know where it begins, Mike? Parkland. Those
Yeah,
Parkland students
yeah,
at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, they see 17 of their friends slaughtered, 17 wounded, and they go, enough.
yeah.
Government isn't going to do anything. And they march. And then comes the Me Too movement. And then comes BLM. And then comes the recent protests on college campuses just this past spring over Israel and Gaza. And my point isn't to argue any side of these issues, but just for us to recognize that the back half of the 9/11 generation is rising and they're becoming incredibly involved. And and why? Because they realize that the older generations have failed. That's the failing part of this book. They were created by this act. They were further created by the government's response to it, and they've been failed by the government on so many fronts. And now they're getting toward. So I actually think the end of this is, in fact, about the resilience of democracy. And so I'm really fascinated to see what these young people do. I think they had a lot to do with Joe Biden stepping down and not running again. I think they're going to be out in force in this election, and that's going to be fascinating to watch. So I think there is some hope here.
Yeah, I think we've seen that already. We've seen a lot of these crowds that have shown up, even with the current campaign, at least from
Sure.
Harris taking over from Biden. You see
Yeah.
these enormous crowds, and you can look through that and see that back half of the Generation Z there. You see them outwardly outspoken. You see them more active on social media. You see them both active on Instagram and X and what's the other one? Threads. Not so much. I'm not on Facebook that much, so I really can't judge
Yeah.
what's going on there. But
Oh,
I see a lot more activism taking place now, especially from younger. Look, to me, they're younger generation.
well, and that wasn't going on 10 years ago. Now,
It was
granted,
not.
some of these platforms have become more popular, but 10 years ago, these kids weren't doing that. So it's
Yeah.
really a young generation that's engaged.
Well, and when you look and you see the lines that are waiting to get into some of these political rallies and things like that, and you kind of look at that and you go, wow. Because before, to me, it was getting complacent. You would look, and it's just like, here's just another one. Here's just another one. Here's just another one. But then you see this invigorating aspect of voice start to show up, and the chants and the everything that came with it. I do see it ignition. We'll use ignition. An ignition of some form of passion with regard to they want change. And we're going to enact that change, and we're going to make sure that that change benefits us, not them, so to speak, or benefits society in such a way that we're not going to put up with it anymore. So I think that a lot of that, and I'm not making a political statement in regard to this. I think the motto that's come out of this is we're not going back.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
it's come from that as well. You hear the chant, "We're not going back." I think it's one of those things you kind of see, to me, a little bit of refreshing
Yeah.
aspect of that. I'm a news hound.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're at a very interesting time too, because in 2026, this country will be celebrating and commemorating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And I serve on a commission here in Connecticut on that. And I held a big conference last year. We invited 250 high school students to the university, and we spent 2 days talking with them and brainstorming and discussing. And one of the things I said to these kids, they were really passionate and they had a lot of ideas. And they said, adults don't think we have anything to say because we've been quiet, but we're not being quiet anymore. We have a lot to say. And I view this generation as perhaps the truest adherents to the meaning of the Declaration of Independence than any generation in American history, because they don't necessarily, they see color, but they don't care about color. They see gender, but they don't care about gender. They have real concerns about society overall and about doing the right thing. And I think that's going to carry us into the future for a long ways. I don't think the experiment in American government is over. I think in many ways it's coming to its fruition.
I appreciate that comment. I think that statement that you made. I think that we are at the cusp of basically recognizing that we have a choice in regard to whether or not our democracy continues or whether or not it fails, and that it's not an experiment anymore. It's either, you know, we have to make sure it solidifies in such a way that we carry on
Yeah.
with a positive aspect of democracy and our ability to be able to communicate that to the world, not only
And
ourselves.
that means, that means recognizing mistakes as well as
Exactly.
successes.
Well, we as
Yeah.
kids, we grow up. You don't don't put your hand in the fire. Don't put the paper clip in the. I did that once. Put the paper clip in the plug. Don't do that again. We all have to learn lessons, right?
You're just describing my children. One of whom we kept telling, don't grab that bee, don't grab that bee. But she had to learn it on her own. And then my younger daughter, who I heard a pop in the bathroom when I walked in, and she'd taken an entire handful of liquid soap and stuffed it into the outlet. I said, why
Jeez.
would you do that? But we have to
Uh,
learn from experiences. And that's exactly what this book is about, Mike. It is about laying out the full story, the real story of 9/11, and saying, listen, here's why this happened. Here's what we did about it. What can we learn from these things so that we can move forward into a better future, right? It's
yeah.
impossible for us to never make mistakes again, but it's foolish of us to keep making the same mistakes.
Profound. Very profound. Let's tell everybody how they can reach this amazing opportunity to get educated, inspired, and motivated.
Well, you can order the book from Routledge Press, or you can go right to Amazon. It's very, very easy to get. If you'd like to learn more about the book, you can see my website address, which is themindfulprofessor.org. If you go there, you'll see the table of contents for the book, and the entire introduction to the book is there. So go check it out, take a look at it, and I'm really, really. I think this is the most important book I've ever written. This is my fifth book. I think this one is just tremendously important to our history and to our present. And it was a difficult book to write. You'll see in the epilogue. I started by saying, it's 3 a.m. I've woken up again from an entire day of writing. My mind is racing, and I grab my phone to write some notes. And my wife turns to me and literally goes, "This book is killing you." And there's truth to that, because it's an important subject, and it's a painful subject, and I want to get it right, and I don't want to dishonor or disrespect anybody who's been impacted by this event, but I also feel like I need to tell the truth about what has occurred, and the mistakes and the successes that we have.
I think it's profound. I think it's an opportunity. Again, I love the word opportunity because we all have an opportunity. We all have a choice, and I think that this is a wonderful opportunity to get to understand a little bit more about our history as a country, our history as a political entity, and our history from a human perspective in regard to where we can go with it in the future and how we carry forward with the lessons we need to have learned. Um, I'll make sure all that stuff's in the show notes so that they have an easy way to get a hold of you, to follow just a link, click it. So if you're watching this, you can see it across the scroll, what we just had earlier. If you are listening to this, just go to the website. In the episode that comes out, it'll be in the show notes. This is one more thing before we go. So this has been an amazing conversation, by the way. Do you have any words of wisdom?
I think you just summed it up when you talked about humanity. That's what we need to focus on. The founders of this country, I always tell my students, the founders of this country, the founding fathers and the founding mothers, were all humanists. They studied so many different facets of life. I mean, look at Ben Franklin, right? Printer, author, politician, diplomat, scientists. They were devoted to the human experience and understanding the human experience. And one of the things we've done in our society, especially America, is we've segmented off pieces of the human experience into so-called digestible chunks, right? And so we started, before the show started, you talked about going to an interdisciplinary program for your grad work. American
Mhm.
Studies, which is my PhD, is a completely interdisciplinary program. We need more of that. We need to
Mhm.
be exploring the human experience and recognizing humanity in other people, not just because of their gender or their political views or their nationality, but This world is facing very, very great challenges. I feel like, with what's going on in Ukraine, South China Sea, Gaza, that we're on the cusp of some very bad things happening. And I wish we could just all take a breath and a step back and have a conversation.
Take a breath and step back. That's
Yeah.
that's a great way. Yeah,
Yeah.
take a breath and step back. Matt, thank you very much for this amazing conversation. I could talk to you for another hour, maybe even
Easily.
two.
Easily. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciated this.
Well, it is again. I learned, and I was inspired, and I was educated, and that's what we all want to walk away with each and every day. Have that opportunity to be able to do that, and you've done that today. So maybe we can have you back on the show again, and we can
Love to do
continue
that.
it. Outstanding. For everyone
Thanks
else
so
out
much,
there,
Mike.
have a one more thing before you all go. Have a great day. Have a great week, and thanks for being part of the community.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.